Structure by death, social network replenishment in the wake of confident loss.
The permanent end of all biological function that sustain an organism is defined as death. Sometimes brain death is used as a legal definition of death. Normally, the remains of a former creatures begin to degrade quickly after death. In simple words, it is the total and permanent cessation of all the vital function of an organism.
Death is the opposite of life. More precisely, it's the end of life. This has two important implications. First, life and death are exclusive. Nothing can be both alive and dead at once. Second, life and death are not exhausted. Some things are neither alive nor dead. Death is not a mere absence of life. And being dead is not the same thing as being non-living. Death is permanent. Irreversible cessation of all biological function that sustain a living organism. The remains of previously living organism normally begin to decompose shortly after death. Death is an inevitable, universal process that eventually occurs in all living organisms.
When someone you know dies, it may turn your world upside down. People grieve in a variety of ways following the death of a loved one. Learn about common reaction to loss and grief, as well as what you can do if you are going through this terrible period. After the initial shock wears off, you're likely to begin grieving. Don't worry about how you're dealing with your situation. Everyone, including me, grieves in their own unique way.
Each Facebook user was considered to have a network that consisted of all of his or her Facebook friends. Each person level of activity was measured by posts, comments, and photo tags. More than 15,000 social networks on Facebook in which the person at the center of that network died, according to the public records, and they compared that data to more than 30,000 social networks where no loss occurred. Based on communication pattern, they were able to classify certain connection as close friend of the one who died and other as acquaintance. For adults user who suffered the loss, their Facebook activity increased by 30%. For young adults ages 18 to 24, that number was as high as 60%. The interaction among close friends of the deceased stays highly elevated for a year, while the interaction between close friends and acquaintances peak for several months.
Loss can be excruciatingly painful at times. You may feel a range of challenging and unexpected feelings, such as astonishment or fury, as well as disbelief, remorse, and great sadness. Grief can also interfere with your physical health, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or even think properly.
When someone dies, particularly someone you were close to, it can be devastating and overwhelming. Bereavement affects us all, but everyone will cope with it differently and experience different feelings. Some may feel shocks and feeling of unreality, particularly in the days after death. Intense sadness, which can feel overwhelming. Anxiety, either general or about something specific, worries about your own morality. Anger and irritation, you may find yourself arguing unexpected with people you're close to. Guilt, feelings of hopelessness and depression, a need to be supportive of others and suppress your own grief.
Sadness, wrath, and guilt, anxiety, loneliness, helplessness, hopelessness, shock, yearning, relief, and numbness are examples of emotional responses. Social withdrawal, changes in activity level, avoidance of places or reminders of the deceased, and attention on reminders of the departed are example of behavioral responses.
You may find that you feel angry or frustrated and want to find something or someone to blame for the loss so that you can try to make sense of it. Feeling overwhelmed, grief can hit people immediately with full force, potentially causing them to cry a lot or feel like they are not coping.
The social consequences of sorrow include retreat, loneliness, disagreement owing to differing grieving methods, and unreasonable expectation of others. Caregivers may retreat from others to cope with their sadness or to avoid unwanted judgment.
Social impacts of grief include withdrawal, isolation, conflict due to people having different style of grieving, unrealistic expectation of others. Sometimes carers withdraw from others in order to cope with their grief or to avoid negative judgment.
Overall, we discovered that older person had smaller social networks. Younger adults under 30 reported having extremely large social networks with hundreds of social interactions. When compared to those in their 20s, person beyond at the age of 30 had substantially smaller social networks.
Overall, we found that older adults reported having a smaller social networks. Younger adults under the age of 30 reported having a very large social networks, often consisting of hundreds of social contacts. Among adults older than age 30, social network size was much smaller compared to those in their 20s.
Social networks member can help people to adapt life stressors, provide daily companionship, and in turn to prevent health-harming behavior, but they can also let people down, cause disagreement, and undercut others in.
Social networks are important because they allow people to develop relationships with others with whom they might not otherwise be able to connect. It also helps boost business productivity when used for public relations, marketing, and advertising purpose.
The latter life course dynamics of network change.
We begin by briefly discussing studies that demonstrates why understanding network change in latter life is critical. We then go into some of the mechanisms that influence social networks during this time period. Finally, we look at all the connections between several types of network change in latter life, such as network loss, expansion, and turnover. Retirement, widowhood, the emptying of the familial nest, and health deterioration are all big life courses events that can have a significant impact on social connectivity. As a result, many researchers are curious on how older adults, engineer, or otherwise adapt to the loss of critical network members, loss of weak relationship to neighbors, friends, and other voluntary association members can have serious consequences for older individuals. Ability to maintain independence and access to resources outside of the family. And the death of a close network member such as spouse can be painful too. The social psychological consequences of network member loss frequently with a focus on the death of a close friend or family member. This type of loss frequently triggers an early psychological grief process which might include depression and loneliness. However, it is crucial to remember that network loss is not always harmful and might even be beneficial in some instances. Some social interactions such as contentious and abusive ones are stressful or even dangerous. Being associated with sick people or those who support and or indulge in healthy conduct might on balance be harmful to one's health. Later in life, Substantial life course adjustments occur. The life course viewpoint emphasizes the consequences of diverse latter life issues for the social integration of older persons. The most significant transitions for older persons include the emptying of the familial nest, retirement, health deterioration, and bereavement. In recent years, attention has shifted to the problem of the circumstances under which older persons' social networks alter, including the livelihood that networks develop as well as shrink in the aftermath of life course change. Latter life issues such as the death of a close friend or family member are unavoidable. There are notable variations between the youngest and the oldest age group in terms of overall proclivity to add new confidence to the networks. This replenishing tendency holds true even when network members are lost due to death. And this is especially true among the sample's oldest senior, those who are in their late 70s and 80s. However, age is associated to these individuals reacted to the loss of a network member. The loss of network members in general was linked to a higher possibility of cultivating new network members.
Changes of personal network configuration over the life course in the USA, a Latin class approach. Social network changes over the life course, change in the size and proportion of the relationship types.
According to Faring and Lewis, in 1991, personal connection evolve through time and are influenced by both expected and unforeseen life events. Prior research has revealed that personal networks normally develop from youth through early adulthood and then gradually constrict with the onset of a gain. In a meta-analysis of 277 social networks on teenage and elderly respondents, discovered that the size of personal network increased considerably in the teenager and young adult populations, then remained stable until the senior populations. Changes in social network composition during the lifespan are one of the less investigated subjects in social network research. While numerous research investigate the relationship between personal relationships, the aging process, the majority of them concentrate on a single average trajectory of personal network changes, rather than personal network or the proposition of relationship types.
Normative life events and social relationships, the necessity for the composition approach.
Life events that most people go through different ages influence changes in personal networks in terms of compositions. Normative life events such as starting school or joining the labor market, getting married, having a kid, and retiring provide or limit possibilities to meet and from social interactions. People tend to interact with many individuals when they enter school or the labor market during their early adulthood. As a result, the share of non-family relationships such as those with friends, co-workers, or acquaintances grows in personal network. Meanwhile, family members active in personal networks are unlikely to change, and young adults are likely to continue frequent contact with their parents and any siblings they may have.
Now we are discussing the social network types and general happiness.
Many empirical investigation and theories agree on the importance of social ties in one's well-being. Isolation from social ties obviously has a detrimental impact on psychological well-being and leads to concerns such as sadness, unhappiness, and anxiety, as well as physical health problems. People who have little or no social engagements may be lacking in the required of social resources that interaction would normally provide, insecurity in terms of social identity. which has emerged and been authorized, altered, and reproduced by social connections, is implied by a lack of social engagement. As a result, social isolation reduces happiness and increases the risk of psychological distress and anxiety. So, example of social network types and general happiness are TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, and etc.
The social network types. There are so many types of social networks, such as the most particular one, which is the social media, and we are using different social network upon different approaches. The personal network composition and the life course.
So, first, we discovered that there are 6 distinct types of social network composition, and that the distribution of those network composition types differs by age group. In general, the shifting prevalence of each form of social network across the life stage suggests that certain network members gradually fade out of social contract, while others have entered the social cycle.
First, people use of social media networks or the 6 distinct of social network has a significant impact. What exactly are they? One of the reasons is a lack of social contact as a result of social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Each person's life gradually undergoing a new cycle. Networks, which take longer to use because they don't have to interact with each other personally to their loved one. Although it helps us to have communication with other relatives or family and friends, it is also one of the reasons why we gradually lose our socialization with our family or a group.
Second, while each type of social network peaks in terms of percentage in a specific age group, this not necessarily imply that a specific type of social emerge as dominant and typically network composition in the age group. It is more realistic to believe that different forms of network composition are layered to varying degrees in each group.
Using every social media platforms does not mean it will apply to everyone. Many, the young people or the age group are more stuck with the social media that is more applicable to their age. For example, in today's trend that Twitter or Instagram are better understood by the new generation, we cannot say that everyone or in the age group of other social media they are accustomed to will also apply to them the new social network sites. For example, if a person accustomed to using old-fashioned social network sites like Friendster instead of Facebook, we cannot force them to keep up with the modern generation of social network sites because not all types of social network are applicable to everyone. Because each type of network has a more dominant standard network composition, particularly in the different areas of age groups.
Third, we discovered 2 fascinating groupings or aberrant groups within those multi-layered types of network composition that appear to be either separated from all types of social contact or constantly lacking familiar relationship, parents, siblings, and spouse.
With the continuous proliferation of social network composition in our society, there is also a continuing disintegration of families, particularly our parents, siblings, or friends, because we no longer know how to socially interact with our families because we even focus on communicating using our gadgets or various social media platforms, constantly missing the act of kinship type where even our own families forget to socialize. That is why it has really increased due to the continuous proliferation of various social media networks because our habit of socializing with our neighbors, particularly with our own families, is also fading.
Ano? Studies on the influence of social relationship on psychological status have found that people with isolated social relationships have about outcome. Previous research suggested the full ties group would have a lower degree of happiness. Furthermore, we then anticipated that the single with the friend and neighbors group would be unhappy in particular life phases due to the continual absence of family and marriage ties in social relationships.
Maybe the social media network is also a source of happiness for young people or even the elderly. In my perception, although there are really bad effects of overuse of various social networks, it is also one of the reasons for me to have fun and be happy. For example, by using Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Because it relieves sadness and boredom when you see these social media platforms. Maybe when using social network site is up to the person how to use it correctly for your own benefits. We should be responsible for use of social network site because it brings happiness to me. But there are also bad things they can bring out to us when we overuse them.